The first footsteps sounded like a drum no one had agreed to play. A woman stepped into the market lane just after sunrise, skirts damp from the river air, and began to move as if tugged by a silent rope. Her neighbors saw her palms slice the air and her heels strike the cobbles in a rhythm that never settled. Someone laughed because it looked like theater, then stopped when the woman, Frau Trophäa, they said, did not stop. She danced through the day, hair sticking to her brow, teeth clenched against something only she could hear. By noon, the butcher's boy trailed her with a bucket of water. By evening, her husband tried to hold her still, and the force was so strong she dragged him 2 steps before he lost his grip. Night folded over Strasbourg and she kept moving. The city in that summer was a set of problems stacked on top of one another. The river had misbehaved in spring and fields were uncertain. Bread prices rose, and the church bells worked harder for funerals than for weddings. The city council argued about money, about guild rules, about the poor pressing up against the cathedral square. When Frau Trophäa's feet began to bleed, no one mistook this for celebration. Her legs seemed to move without permission, like cables tightening and releasing. On the second day, she collapsed twice and stood up again with a sound that mixed a sob and a gasp. People gave her space because they were afraid of being touched by the same invisible hand. By the third day, others had joined her. Witnesses said they came not because they wanted to dance, but because they could not keep their bodies from doing it. A teenage boy who had come to sell fruit began stamping beside her and burst into tears while his legs kept time. A widow from across the river traced circles until her shoes shredded and left red lines on the stones. Market women pressed cloths to the dancers' foreheads and tried to tip broth into shaking mouths. It helped for minutes. Then the bodies drove on, jerking like marionettes with hard hands on the strings. People whispered names for it: curse, sickness, punishment. Children were pulled indoors, shutters latched. At first, the city physician advised what passed for reason. Do not bind them. Do not frighten them. Let the motion run its course. He argued that the body, trapped in a fever of the blood, might burn out if given to its urge. The council, desperate for control, approved musicians to lead the frenzy to its finish. Drummers and pipers were hired. A small platform was thrown together in the square so dancers would not break bones on uneven stone. What came next unsettled even those who believed they were doing good. The beat pulled more victims from house to street. The sight of the stage made some fall into step like soldiers forced forward. Dozens became scores. Reports counted hundreds within weeks. The cadence was relentless. People smiled and grimaced in the same face, lips whispering prayers while their feet punished the ground. The cost showed in small ways first. Bakers woke to find a portion of flour missing where families had traded loaves for soft shoes to spare raw feet. Mothers lined doorways with straw to quiet the clatter of a son who could not stop pacing. Men who prided themselves on control wept when they saw their wives lurch forward again after an hour of stillness. In the heat, bodies gave out and were dragged to shade. Some recovered for a day, only to jolt awake at midnight as if struck by lightning and fling themselves back into the street. Pastors spoke of Saint Vitus, whose name was tied to a known convulsion, and of sin and fear. Others said the grain was spoiled and had put poison in the bread. The truth hid inside the noise. When the physician's plan made things worse, the council reversed itself with the same speed panic always brings. Musicians were ordered to stop. Public dancing, any dancing, was banned on threat of punishment. Weddings had to be performed without pipes, and a clerk sent notices to taverns warning that any tapping of the foot might be taken as a sign of rebellion against God and the law. The platform came down with a thud of wet wood. What remained were the sufferers, scattered now, screaming when hands tried to steady their knees. A new cure rose from an older well. Priests proposed that the dancers be taken to a shrine of Saint Vitus, whose patronage, they said, could loosen the knot. Carts were organized. Families lifted relatives whose bodies twitched even in sleep. The road out of Strasbourg was gray with dust and murmured with whispered pleas. At the shrine, the afflicted were given blessed cloths tied at the arm and told to press an image of the saint against their chests. Some were fitted with small shoes dyed in a holy color, intended to humiliate the evil that had taken root. The ceremony looked like sense. No one could say whether it worked because belief or exhaustion did the work. What is certain is that some calmed there and returned home walking like themselves again. Still, the city counted losses. Chroniclers later wrote that many died, of heat, of heart failure, of strokes, mid-step or after. The records that survive name numbers differently, but every version speaks of neighbors who were present one afternoon and gone by the next. Those who lived spoke of deep muscle pain that rang like iron for weeks, and of dreams where their legs ran without them. A merchant said he woke each night convinced he could hear shoes on stone and had to stand by the window to prove the lane was empty. The doctor who had ordered the musicians walked with his head down. A man who had learned that certainty is not the same as cure. Investigations followed, as they always do after chaos. Clerics mapped the dates and imagined a chain of sin and punishment. Physicians looked at the season and suspected a natural cause that inflamed the blood. Tradesmen asked about the grain and whether rot in the rye could creep up through the loaf and gnaw at the brain. Elders remembered other towns where similar frenzies had passed like storms and left shame behind. A few observed the most human answer. Fear is contagious, and despair needs only a demonstration to become a crowd. In that hard summer, when prices rose and funerals came too often, the sight of one woman trapped in her own body may have taught others how to be trapped. The dance ran along that lesson like fire runs along dry wood. By late August, the streets grew quieter. People started to stop before they collapsed. Those who helped learned to guide the trembling into courtyards, to sit them down gently, to give water in small sips, instead of trying to command a halt. The council, eager to claim order, published rules that made the city sound newly sober. Fares were monitored, music remained restricted. Alms were directed to the poor who had nothing left after weeks of lost work. The merchants swept the square before dawn as if erasing scuffs could erase memory. Strasbourg went back to buying and selling. The river kept moving east. Years later, parents would warn children not to mock a man with an odd gait. Travelers who had passed through spoke of a city that had been made ridiculous by a plague without a rash. Church records kept the dates. Physicians kept their theories. Survivors kept quiet. People who had watched Frau Trophea begin it all remembered the way her face looked, not wild as rumors had it, but focused, like someone trying to copy steps being called from a distance in a language she did not know. Her husband moved away from the market lane. The butcher's boy grew up, took over the stall, and told the story only when pressed. It never felt like theater to the ones who were there. It felt like a city discovering how thin the membrane is between control and something that uses your body against you. It felt like neighbors who could not look away from a sight they feared would reach through the crowd and choose them next. It felt like officials trying one solution, then its opposite, because that is what governments do when the ground moves and no one can see the fault line. It ended not because an answer was found, but because whatever current had picked up the people finally ran out of charge. On a cool morning near the end, after the worst had passed, a woman swept her stoop and thought she heard the ghost of a drum. She stared down the lane and saw only the ordinary: 2 boys chasing a dog, a man delivering bread, a priest with his head bent against the wind. She went inside and shut the door gently so the latch would not sound like a beat. The square filled and emptied. The city learned, as cities do, to to live with the memory of a thing it could not fully explain. Thank you for listening to The Lantern's Tale. Subscribe for more true stories, if you dare.